Represent is the PAC in Pennsylvania dedicated to electing pro-choice women to the state legislature. Pro-choice Democratic women to the state legislature. And as I've said many times, we like to elect candidates who want to do something and not just be somebody. And we had, for many years, nothing ever happened in the legislature because there were a lot of candidates who viewed this to be just a nice job with benefits. And they got to be important because they're a state legislator. Where we've elected some amazing women over the 10 years that we've had victories, and we're really proud of today's talk because it's an important issue for all of us. Next slide, please. Speaking of 10 years, we're talking about this year as 10 years of victories. Yes, we started a little bit before 2015, but 2015 was the first year that we had 3 victories in special elections. And do you know who those women are? I like to remind everybody. The first victory we had was Leanne Kruger from Delaware County. And Leanne chaired the HDCC, the campaign group, while they achieved the majority. And Leanne is in leadership now. Donna Bullock from Philadelphia. Donna Bullock chaired the Black Caucus, and now she's dealing with women and families in Harrisburg. Again, a member of leadership. And the other woman we elected in 2015 by supporting her in a primary against 3 men was our speaker, Joanna McClinton. And so we talk about 10 years of victories. And since that time in 2015, we're very proud of the work we've done. We've always, for several years now, we've had a very wonderful donor who has matched money that's come in during Women's History Month in March. But because this is 10 years of victories, she agreed to, and we got a few other people to help with the match this year. We're having a 10-week program. So any new money that comes in, if you were a $100 a month person before and you give us an extra X dollars, that X will be matched. Or brand new donors to us, the money will be matched in February and March. So make sure your friends know about this. Next. You know, this is the start of Black History Month. And if you look at the women here that are 2024 Black Caucus endorsees, these are strong women. Some of them were new this cycle. Some of them were have been in the past. But they're strong women, and we're just so proud that we know them all, and we've helped to change what Pennsylvania looks like. We believe in reflective democracy, which is until and unless our elected officials look like all of us from throughout the state, race, gender, economic background, religion, you name it. We need to have a variety of people to make sure that the right conversations are had in Harrisburg. I also love this picture. Several of our past endorsees sent it out because they were proud of being part of the Black Maternal Health Caucus. But look at this picture. There are men in the picture, but there are 26 women in this picture. All but 3 of them have been elected since Represent started having victories in 2015. We're incredibly proud of this because it helps all of us by bringing change, by changing the conversation in Harrisburg. So that's my commercial. And that's me patting myself on the back and the rest of my team who are on this call. We talk about these breakfast briefings as your civic education. What do you need to know? What's happening in Harrisburg and why you should care. Senator Maria Collette recently was talking at an event that I attended, and she was talking about one of the values she has seen about Represent over the years is we have found money that the caucuses never could have found. And that's by talking about why people should care about what goes on in Harrisburg, how their lives are affected by what goes on in Harrisburg, and why giving money to us has made a difference. And so people who are running both the House and the Senate caucus this year are very conscious of the fact that Represent has made a difference in what's going on. Again, my commercial. But we want to continue this trend, and we know what we're doing this year. We had a discussion a few months ago about education funding, in particular, the Basic Education Funding Commission and how it was set up. In February of 2023, we talked, or shortly thereafter, we talked about the ruling at Commonwealth Court that the way Pennsylvania funds education is unconstitutional and must be reformed. But there were no guidelines set up as part of that hearing. It was assumed that in that ruling, it would be clear, since it is unconstitutional, something would happen. The governor's office and the legislative chambers decided not to appeal the ruling, and a commission was set up to develop a response, and their report was issued this month. We have for years at Represent talked about the fact that Pennsylvania has the most uneven system of education in terms of the discrepancy between rich and poor school districts in the nation. And this is set up to talk about that adequacy cap. And they voted and they determined that there was $5.4 billion in adequacy gap, but other people said it was at least $6 billion over the 5 years. I don't know. But I know the people who know the answers, and that's what we're giving you today. I've often said that one of my goals in flipping the Senate, one of my true goals in flipping the Senate is, we list Senator Lindsey Williams here from Allegheny County as the chair of education. She's a minority chair of the Education Committee. And the way the legislature works is the minority chairs of both House and Senate committees have some push and do continue to push and make themselves heard. But until they have the chair, they don't have the right to bring up legislation, and they can't make unilateral decisions. Senator Lindsey Williams, I'm still looking to make you chair of the Education Committee. I tell people that all the time.
I will still gladly take it.
Okay. You're not backing down. We also have Rep. Mary Isaacson from Philadelphia County. I'm pleased to say that Mary is my own representative in Harrisburg, but she has a degree in early childhood education, and she was also on this commission. And we also have Donna Cooper, who's been an occasional speaker on these programs. She's the executive director of Children First and has had a number of amazing positions driving policy in Pennsylvania. And by changing the legislature and by flipping chambers, we put meat and teeth into what she's been working on, into the policy recommendations she's had. She speaks well for all of us Pennsylvanians. Just for your education, I just want to make sure people know where these representatives or our speakers today are from. And it gives you an idea that we are a statewide or Commonwealth-wide organization. You can see Rep. Mary Isaacson's district on the left, and you can see Senator Lindsey Williams' district on the right. But it's Pittsburgh and it's Philadelphia, but they talked about everything in between. Okay, let's go off my slides, and now I'm going to turn it over to Donna Cooper. And Donna's going to give you some background on and tell you about education funding, talk about the gap and the work of the committee, and then we're going to bring on our two electeds to talk about, from their point of view, how did the committee work, because they were on it, how did the commission work, and what's going to happen next. So Donna Cooper, it's yours.
Thank you. And it's so important that you hear from Lindsey and Mary that I'm going to try and go through this quickly, because the basics of what you need to know are pretty simple. The process to get what we need is much more complicated. And so I want to try and go through these pretty quickly. Just by way of background, this is we in Pennsylvania created the Basic Education Funding Commission, or I should say the lawmakers did, in 2014. And there's been two commissions since the legislation was put in place in 2014, one in 2015 and one in 2023. For the purpose of Represent, you can show the impact of your work, because in the first commission, there was only one woman, and now we're up to 3. So in addition to Representative Isaacson and Senator Williams, Senator Kristen Phillips Hill was the majority Senate chair, co-chair with the House Ds on the commission. The first commission in 2015 had a unanimous report, and it paved the way for the 2016 fair funding formula that Governor Wolf was able to get enacted. And in 2024, and I will say, because the 2024 report that was backed by the majority was more detailed and made a bigger stake impact on education equity, it was not possible to achieve a consensus, but a majority report was issued, as well as a minority report last month. So this is like crazy type here, but I just wanted you to, you don't need to really like work your way through this, but this is basically what the legislation requires of the commission. And I think what's really important to understand is that the commission's scope is somewhat constrained, but not entirely. And that's been a bone of contention, where the power says they should develop a basic education funding formula and identify factors that may be used to figure out how we should fund our schools. And factors 1 and 2 on here are about local tax effort. Factor 3 is really responding to the fact that rural districts have particularly high costs for things. And then the needs of growing districts, the needs of low-income districts. And so this is the enabling legislation, and it did not explicitly give the powers to the commission to do 3 things that school advocates have long needed us and legislators who care about these issues need the commission to do. It was not explicit that they had the charge to estimate the level of funding needed for the state to meet its constitutional obligation. It wasn't explicit that they had to estimate the target level of resources needed for every student. And it wasn't explicit that they needed to recommend the appropriate balance between local tax effort and the school needs. So what that means is in the first report, they kind of skirted those issues. And in the second report, because it wasn't explicit, they had the powers. The majority report took those powers and basically said, we're going to estimate the amount of money needed. We're going to estimate that at a per student level so school districts can know what they need. And we're going to start to take a stab at the appropriate balance between local tax effort and school districts. And state funding. So what you should know is that, like, one of the good things that happened out of the first commission is we adopted a formula that basically accelerated funds to districts that had high numbers of low-income kids. Not only low income, but especially low income. If you had kids at 50% of the federal poverty level, the number of those kids you got slightly more. And you also got more resources for concentration of poverty, where school buildings had more than 30% of their kids in poverty, those school districts got more. And also more per student for kids who were English language learners. And to offset the impact of charter enrollment, a factor that also gave districts more money based on the number of kids in charters. And it also attempted to try and respond to places like Greater Johnstown, which is an extraordinarily high tax effort and is a very poor community. And it too also put extra money into rural districts where it's very hard to attract staff and school districts are really too small to have economies of scale. So that was a really good thing. It's very similar, although better than what Rendell had enacted in 2006 that Corbett blacklined out. So we restored the basic ed funding formula, which was great. And it was better than any one we ever had, and a really, really, formula we in Pennsylvania can take pride in across the country. When Governor Wolf came in, his first budget proposed $5.6 billion in education funding. That was about $400 million more than the last year of Corbett. And it grew to $7.08 billion. So Governor Wolf was able to put a 25% increase in school funding, $1.4 billion, through that formula, right? So we began to see some relief for school districts that had lots of struggling students. Now, remember, in this time period, we also had COVID, which took a toll, and this is not related to COVID money, but school districts definitely have been set back as a result of what COVID's impact has been on students. So what happened is you all said at the first slide that the original plaintiffs in the court case said, look, the shortfall is needed to get kids up to give every kid a quality education is $6.4 billion. And in fact, that was accurate based on 2021 data. It did not factor in the $1 billion increase in the last year of the Wolf administration, which was the largest school funding increase ever. And so the staff for the Basic Ed Funding Commission recalibrated the adequacy shortfall to count for that and to adjust for other data that's happened since 2021, and estimated that the shortfall is now 5.4 billion. Of which, remember, when the court case talked about that shortfall, it was a total spending shortfall, local effort, state effort. So the commission staff identified that at the $5.4 billion shortfall level, 5.1 billion of that is really due to the state's underfunding. So there isn't it's not shenanigans here. This is basically updating for the accuracy of the data. And by the way, I think the argument between 6.4 and 5.4 is kind of academic, we got a long way to go. So we hope that we can get the 5.1 billion, and that's really what we need to focus on. I also want to say that there's some structure to the way the majority report recommended these funds go out. First of all, they said every district should get an increase, so that way we're not in the Hunger Games where some people are getting funds and some people aren't. But they also said, look, what's most important is that we have an adequacy target for districts and that state funds be primarily used to reach that adequacy target. The other thing is that the report also said we need to think about tax equity. And I'm sure Senator Williams will have a lot to say about that. But it basically was an effort to build some consensus, to give some relief in districts, and I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about that have a high tax effort. Other small things that were recommended in the majority report are that the commission be reconstituted in 2029, and that there be some continued conversations about school facilities, charter school funding, education workforce, meaning teachers, student supports, and other things outside of the scope of the BEFC. But the core of this was really basically saying we need to invest in adequacy, and in doing that, we need to think about both tax effort, equity, and making sure every district gets money. The first little bullet point here, it says reduce the volatility of the basic ed formula. Basically, there were factors used in the formula that need to be smoothed out by using 3-year averages. They, on the margin, change things very small, but they enable people to not have shocks when their district go through small transitions, like you have one less kid in poverty or one less kid in concentrated poverty. You smooth that out over 3 years. The basics, as I said, these are the 4 elements, 3 elements and a timeline. Ensure every district gets some new money, get adequacy for districts with high need students that have low resources, and some tax equity. And to do this in 7 years. That's sort of they are the basics of the majority recommendation. There's also a minority report, and the minority report, so I should say this was a party line vote. I skipped in the beginning to say that both commissions were, as constituted, had Democratic majorities, because the representatives on the commission are members of the House and Senate and 3 members from the governor's office. So you automatically, if it's a sitting governor, you have a 9-6 majority. And so that's what we had here, 9-6 majority. So the minority was unwilling to come to the table on agreeing on an adequacy gap and an amount, unwilling to come to the table on a timeline. There were many other areas where they were unwilling to come to the table that I'm sure Lindsey and Mary will go over, but in general, in terms of the specifics on school funding, that wasn't where they would be. So they wouldn't estimate school needs, and they wanted to make sure that they recommended vouchers. So they were 2 bright line problems that made it impossible for them to sign on to the majority report. But one of the things I think is really important is they did say, when the General Assembly takes up adequacy, and in our view, any additional resources would address adequacy gaps must come with accountability. So I think there was, in my most generous day, I would say there's an opening there where the lawmakers agreed that adequacy needs to be a topic that is solved for by the General Assembly. And then they have talked about that there needs to be investments in things that make sense to accountability for how those investments happen. And they included in the report 28 recommendations, for what they look like. And those 28 recommendations are also in the Democratic report. So we have some confluence on what are the ways in which new school funds should be spent to boost student achievement. And so I do think that's a place where the Republicans and Democrats, when we get the new money, can agree these are really good things. And they're like reducing class size, full day K, full day kindergarten, I should say, pre-K, doing the science of reading. I mean, I shared with Tiffany the full report, and you can see the 28 practices there. So at least we have a way to begin to say to people, there's agreement, this is what our children need. And one report and one party has already said they'll put the money behind it. And so that's like a big bright line, like they're already like on the hook for what they said needs to happen, but they are not on the hook for the money. The other thing is that neither report was very specific at all about the amount of resources needed for pre-K, school facilities, although I will say that the House Democrats and Senate Democrats did a great job in the fiscal code getting school facility money. Still no movement yet on any kind of charter reform, including cyber charter reform. I will just say last week, the Shapiro administration authorized a charter where the executive director of that charter, cyber charter, is a former staffer with the Commonwealth Foundation. Just wrap your head around that. Career-related learning or student supports. Those things are not identified in the specific in any of the reports, although the majority report specifically said these are areas where we need to continue to have this conversation and get further. So in terms of the other part of the majority report, which I think is really, for me, really important, is they also said, what do we need to do in the first year? And that sets the stage for what's going to happen next week, right? And thereafter. So they recommended, look, everybody should get some money. Let's look at 200 million across all the school districts, and then 871 million to begin to close the gap for where districts have high need students and they don't have the resources to spend for them. I wish that would be higher, especially when you look at the next number of 955 million to respond to districts that have high tax effort. And I'm going to leave it up to Senator Williams to comment on that, since this is something that she was intimately involved in. The year one recommendations, just in contrast to the tax effort stuff, none of the other things were there any year one recommendations in the majority report. Now, I want to be really clear. We are extremely grateful that there was a majority report that had real numbers, that began to make a real stake in this and say we need over a 7-year timeline to solve for the constitutional infringement on our students. And so while there are ways that we can improve on the work of the majority report, the House and Senate Democrats and the governor's staff really responded to the court case. They really responded to the needs of kids. And I know that Mary and Lindsey are going to lead the charge to make sure more happens. Just as we're entering the budget process, I want everybody to have in mind that the rainy day fund balance is now $7 billion. The current year budget is going to estimated to have a surplus of $6.2 billion, and that's after we already made another transfer of $695 million into the rainy day fund. So that brings the total amount of funding that is unallocated in the state budget for operating costs to $13 billion. And I understand that the House D and Senate D budget folks think the year-end balance will be closer to $14 billion. So that's just something to keep in mind as we go through this. Apropos, the last thing I want to say is when Christine opened this, she said the court decided on February 7th that our Commonwealth was violating the constitutional rights of our children. And on February 7th, many of us will be in Harrisburg marking that anniversary. And I just invite anybody here, I'll put stuff in the chat while our great legislators are talking about coming up to Harrisburg on February 7th to mark the anniversary of the lawsuit. And I'll also put something in the chat about the February 6th analysis we'll be releasing on Governor Shapiro's budget, so that you have a sense of did it meet the mark or not on this and other kids' issues. Thank you.
Okay, and Donna, when you've been talking, one of the questions that came up is these are total, are these the 6.4 billion, is that one time or is that an annual number?
So it's, we need to increase school funding in a recurring way by 6.4 billion. But it's not 6.4, so let's clear that out.
Okay,
Updated numbers. So really what we need to be talking about is the shortfall in the Commonwealth is 5.4 billion, of which 5.1 billion is due to the shortage of state spending. So right now we're at about, I don't know, 7.3 or 4 billion in basic ed funding, and that's got to rise by 5.1 billion
a year, per year.
a year. Yeah. Now
Right.
we're not going to do that in 1 year. We're going to do that over 7 years, but it will have to be at that level going forward.
But there can be an infusion from the rainy day fund to make up for past.
To kickstart it, absolutely.
Kickstart it.
Mhm.
The other question we're going to be looking forward to hearing about, especially from our legislators, is there was a comment in the chat about the governor's support of charter schools and money that comes out of the public budget. So I'm sure one of you will comment on that. So Senator Williams, Rep.
I was going to say,
Who
Mary,
goes
why don't
first?
you go
just sitting
first?
here waiting for you.
Yeah, why don't you go first, Mary? And then I'll follow after you.
Sure. Well, just to comment on the governor, as we started this in the pre-conversation, not all Democrats are of always liked mind,
Right.
considering they just approved a new cyber charter school. Well, we have thrown reforms, and I believe, we have a bill over in the Senate, hopefully can get some movement on fixing cyber charters. But Donna, great presentation. You really hit it. You have to understand, for those who were asking about how quickly we're going to infuse this money, it's over time, so it's manageable, but it's also manageable by the school districts because they can only spend so quickly. Also, there has to be planning on their part, but if we have a consistent plan put forth, then that makes it easier for them as each year we build in sending out, and certainly highlights that I really want to emphasize, and I'm sure Senator Williams will understand, agree with this. We made sure that no school district got hurt. No one was going to lose, because if they had done a just applicable, remove the hold, harmless, and everything else, there would have been some real hurt and damage to school districts. And the whole point of this was to boost education funding and spending. And that was one of the priorities that we put in this formula, was making sure that every school district was protected, and then recognizing that, the different weights need to go in to different school districts. Not all children learn alike. You have all sorts of issues from, language learning to poverty and everything else that needs to go in. Certainly my district, in my area, we are part of the Philadelphia School District, but if for some reason we had our own little catchment, my schools that are specific in my district would be, palatial estates. But we understand that we collectively all have to bring and educate children and society together to the best of our ability, because an educated society is what we all have to strive for and make sure happens. And that's just the priorities and the values that we share. And that's how we came to the majority report that we had, because certainly during the process, there was some amazing conversations and dialogues going on with our colleagues from the state. I literally heard, like, why do you need air conditioning in schools? From one of my colleagues. When we were talking about facilities, I just kind of stared. But, one thing that wasn't emphasized as much in Donna's presentation that I do want to point out is there's the basic education funding that we put forth in this, but then there is the facilities money that we took separate and above from the basic ed numbers and the formula that was put forth. Because during our journey across the state, facilities was an issue in every district. It didn't matter whether it was a wealthy, rural, suburban, urban district, poverty, aging infrastructure. And it was not just whether you had air conditioners or asbestos, it was the boiler, the roof. These were issues that were affecting every school district that we visited and that testified. And we really took that to heart as we came up with this, and understanding that we need to make those investments and help the schools around the Commonwealth, and that facilities money doesn't come out of their share and their pot of money that should be going towards educating the child. So where they may have bonds and obligations that the school districts have already used for their facilities, this extra jolt of money availability is going to help school districts with working on their facilities issues, separate and above from using their general fund money. So that was another accomplishment, and that brings the number, because that's over $2 billion. You know, you're looking at $8 billion, what we're really talking about proposing over these 7 years. And you know, there's always room for improvement. Like I said, not every Democrat's made alike. I think Senator Williams is going to definitely talk about how she and I don't agree with our governor on his stance of charters, cyber charters, funding schools, and especially private schools. But that is, you know, again, we as a Democrat, I say we have to be a big tent, and we're not always going to agree on everything. But and that's where our report came from. It came from a compromise. It came from trying to put forth the best we could. As Donna pointed out, our Republican colleagues did not want to define adequacy, and they certainly did not enjoy discussing equitable in education. And I'm sorry if they want to stick their head in the sand on the fact that we have a very diverse population here in Pennsylvania. But we have to, again, as I said earlier, a core value of mine and my colleagues is that we must have an educated society. That is our obligation as citizens, and that is our obligation as the government, to provide the adequate and equitable education system. And so we put forth this report, and it was quite the journey. Like I said, some of the comments I heard were kind of astounding on where people come at this, but you know, I'm happy to take questions after Senator Williams speaks on her feelings on our journey down this path.
Before Senator Williams starts, I just want to remind everybody what happens, you know, how cyber schools are funded. You know, one of you could, you know, correct me, but my understanding is if, for example, a school district average spending, or they allocate $10,000 per student per year, if one of the students drops out of the public school and goes to, let's say, a cyber school, the school district is required to pay that charter company $10,000. Their expenses for the building, their expenses for the principal, their expenses for everything other than, you know, maybe.
Correct. And the cyber charter school does not have those necessarily brick and mortar
They don't have those expenses.
And quite frankly, one of the biggest gimmicks that they have is the poaching and the advertisements they do. They find the most expensive school districts that pay the largest amount of money, say like East Stroudsburg, that pays like $15,000 per student, and they go and advertise and try and get the students from those school districts. And it's defunding the public education system. It's corporate education at its worst. And the results are not, they're not producing children who are getting an education that meets the standards that we hope to have and the benchmarks. So, and then they just move them along. And again, we come and we wonder where society's coming to.
And they also often poach the smartest kids and the kids who don't have needs in terms of learning English.
That's more regular charters than cyber
Yeah,
charters.
cyber
Cyber
charters,
charters that's a financial industry. That's it.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you. But I just wanted to make sure everybody understood when we're talking about these things, that this is money that comes out of the school districts without costs going down,
Right. Which is why we need reforms.
which is why we.
26 years later.
And
That's
if
correct.
you assumed $10,000 for this new cyber charter per student, they're projected to have 8,200 students by year 5. That means $82 million a year will go to this cyber charter that would not go to your home districts. So just a rough back of the napkin estimate.
And most of that'll be profit for the charter, the cyber charter companies.
The company and Pearson, which was the for-profit company that partnered with the Commonwealth Foundation and others to get this cyber charter approved. It was denied, just to make matters worse, it was denied twice previously. It was its third application. This third application also had deficiencies in terms of curriculum, professional development, financial, and insurance. And was
Senator, can I mention 2 other things about that for everybody's benefit? Pennsylvania has the largest cyber charter enrollment of any state. We have the most unregulated cyber charter sector. The company working on with the Commonwealth Foundation on the last application, currently Pearson works with 2 other cybers. One of those cybers has 5.4% of its kids passing the state assessments, and the other has 10.2% of its children's passing the state assessments. And PDE had that testimony from the PA Charter Performance Center, knew that, and granted this charter. One question for the incoming Shapiro administration, now a year old, is why did that happen?
So we're not just talking about cyber charters because we're Democrats and we believe in socialization of education. We're talking about this because we want to provide quality education for all of our students at a reasonable cost. And this is just costing our students in terms of quality of education and in terms of funding. And that's my commercial. Senator Williams, we're on to you.
Okay, so turning back to BEFC, I can complain about charters and vouchers a different day. We can come back and have that discussion in detail. So Mary and I and the rest of the commission members spent a lot of time on the BEFC. It was a lot of work. It was, I don't know, 12, 13 meetings across the state, lots of hours of testimony, lots of prep beforehand, executive sessions after. There was a lot of thought and effort that went into this commission. As said, there was a majority report, a minority report. The minority report we all saw when we sat down. I'm assuming they probably saw our Democratic report when we sat down, because at the end of the day we ended up just doing our own reports. The minority report was voted down by the House and Senate Ds. The governor's administration abstained from that vote. So I want to say that report had vouchers, had a tax on teacher pension, and some other nasty stuff in there, and the governor's administration abstained from voting no on that report. So I just want to point that out. The majority report, yes, Mary, Donna were 100% correct. There's a lot of good stuff in that report. We were having, bipartisan conversations about where we can get to, and where we going to get to an agreed report. I don't know. Probably not. But I'm always willing to try. We have to have, that's the job of us to have those discussions and try to get to where we can get. At the end of the day, when I looked at a Democrat-only report, I wanted it to be bolder. If it was only going to be a Democrat report, I think there's difference between the things I'd give up. If it was a bipartisan report, I'd be willing to not have numbers in places and be have a smaller number in other places, that sort of thing. You give and take so that bipartisan report gets enacted. when I was seeing a Democrat only report, I wanted it to be bolder. I wanted to have a more aggressive timeline that was front loaded. I wanted to see more money in facilities. And I know that Mary does not disagree with any of this. I wanted to see, you know, a number in what we need to do in charter reform, both brick and mortar and cyber charter. So it's, you know, special ed rates as well. I wanted to see not just the court expert said $1 billion in pre-K. I wanted to see the commission recommends $1 billion in pre-K. So if we're going to use this as the basis of negotiating, I want everything. And so for me, that is where it came down on the report, is that I wanted to see all of that. And we didn't have all of that in the minority report. We had a lot of great things and talked about all those problems, but I wanted us to be bold in naming the solution for all of those problems. So I take questions.
Christine, can I ask Senator Williams a question
Please
that
do,
might
Donna.
illuminate something for the folks here, if you
Please
don't
do.
mind?
Oh, and I want to answer the hold harmless question too. Go.
Yeah, I put some data for you in the chat if you want to see it, but beyond that, and you probably know it, I was interested in understanding, Senator Williams, the trade-offs. So for instance, I understand that you were very explicit about the trade-off on the tax equity supplement and pre-K, and I just wondered if you might want to share that with folks.
Yeah. So the $1 billion that went for the tax equity, that was something that came up in the last like 48 hours of negotiation. And that was not like, we didn't receive testimony on that or how that formula should work or what it should do. And moving from a larger number to a smaller number and then putting $1 billion in this, there are some districts that did better. There are a lot of districts that did worse, that would have done better if we just put the whole amount through. And there are other states where that $1 billion towards pre-K has done way better in terms of results, because we know that every dollar you invest in pre-K, Donna, correct me if I'm wrong, is like $7 in outcomes. So I would have rather seen $1 billion in pre-K rather than the tax equity that was like had a lot of winners and losers and didn't have full input into whether that was the right way to spend that $1 billion. And so that was also something that I considered.
Mary, would you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, if I could sit here and say I would have funded everything, you know, as an early childhood educator,
Right.
I'm very keenly aware of and part of the caucus to get further education. But I also know that a lot of the discussion has always been regarding the local shares and the ability to, and who can and can't. As I said, I'm part of the Philadelphia School District, and where my district is located, if we kept our local property tax share just within my area, what the schools would look like compared to what they do elsewhere. You know, but we don't do that. We try and spread it out and put it everywhere. Same thing with our early childhood money. You know, this was the basic education funding commission,
Right.
and we had to emphasize a lot. And sometimes I had to rein in my chairman for my caucus, who is the chair of the commission, on he was ready to make you know, pre-K 3 and 4 part of basic education, and you know, we could imagine the effect that would have had on the public school system. What an expansion. And those are all lofty ideas, and I'm very supportive of it. But we had to get to a place where we could get the administration on board and get the place we needed to be with the court case that just kind of coincided with this commission. This
Yeah.
commission, I heard a lot from my colleagues on the other side about how we were a reconstituted commission and we were only supposed to be tinkering with the basic ed funding formula and revisiting it in the statutory obligation of 5 years later. We took it to a different level to try and comply with the court case so that we weren't coming back to this. We wanted to make sure that we were expanding to include accessible, adequate, and equitable, which was not something that's defined in the mission of the commission. We took it there, and we got the governor's office to get there too, and we had to come up with something for everybody. And that's where we got to, and the product that I believe you're going to hear the governor put forth next week is going to be reflective of what we were able to negotiate. And it had, like I said, it's, you know, it's not, there's nothing perfect in life, but I think this is the best product we could get.
And Mary is right. You know, we were negotiating in a way that it's hard when you're not starting from a fundamental belief in public education to get to where you need to be. And I had a thought, and I lost what it was.
Well,
They wanted to relitigate the court case, even though they didn't appeal it. So like, I got into it with the Commonwealth Foundation testifier when their entire testimony was everything that would have been presented to the court and rejected by the court. And so that was our starting place, like that you know, argument that not all kids deserve a thorough and efficient system of public education. So that is a hard place to be.
Well, and when it comes to property tax, quite frankly, you know, we had a group that followed us around the entire Commonwealth and sat in the front row from Central Pennsylvania. And they finally got to testify at one, and you should have heard how when I tried to point out to get rid of property tax because they were seniors and they shouldn't have to pay property tax to support schools because they don't have kids in school. Again, they obviously don't share my priority as a fundamental of society is educating it. When they went to sales tax, and I pointed out what a regressive tax that is, especially with the poor people, their response was, "Well, don't worry, they can use their welfare cards."
Yeah, you know,
you're dealing, like I said, you're dealing with a mentality there. And, you know, and as I've said from the beginning of this thing, not all Democrats believe and are created in the same likeness. So I'm not going to throw anybody under, you know, the bus on this, but we tried to do the best we could with it. And there was a question, by the way, I do want to address in the chat. I saw really quick about when we go back to funding education and the private dollars that go into it. And this is where I come in to say, sometimes, you know, we have to eat it. I've never until last year ever voted for an increase in the EITC. Unfortunately, to get reforms, which we did get this year, and so that we can look at that program, which we hadn't been able to before, we had to put up the vote to increase that. I'm not particularly fond of that program. I understand it exists and it does some good, but I also want to see the numbers behind it and who's getting it and where is it going to. Because it's one thing to say that we want to help the poor children. It's another one we're just subsidizing people's education choices to go to private school. But again, we'll hopefully in the next few years see the results of that reform for the EITC, which is the public money that does go to private schools right now. So I saw that question. I wanted to answer it.
And I want to answer the hold harmless question too. So if we were to tomorrow get rid of hold harmless, go right to pushing
Say
all,
again what hold harmless means.
that it saves the level of funding for a particular year for districts, so they don't ever get any less than that, even if
And
they,
those are including districts that are losing enrollment because people are moving out of the school district.
Yeah. So for
Or shrinking
example,
population.
so for example, Pittsburgh has lost population. If we move to a full funding formula, they would lose $97 million in 1 year. They can't sustain that. And there's a lot of districts that would be like pushing them off a cliff. The benefit of putting the adequacy dollars in and tweaking the formula and doing all the things that we want to do, hold harmless, if you have enough money in the system, hold harmless becomes irrelevant because everybody has the dollars and the investment they need. And then hopefully in places like Pittsburgh, the other things that we do in education, pre-K, charter school reform, facilities investment, all of those things help those districts that would not get an adequacy supplement, but still have challenges in terms of funding. Because places like Pittsburgh and many others, they may not look on paper like they're underfunded, but we heard, and every single hearing from every single school district, large, small, rural, suburban, that if you don't fully fund the districts are going to figure out how to fund what they need. So they're going to steal from facilities. They're going to steal from special ed. They're going to steal from arts and science. They're going to move things around,
Which they've been doing for a long time.
to fund their the
Right.
things that they need to, including their special ed mandated costs and things like that. Like they will figure it out and steal from things if we don't fully fund the whole picture. So look forward to a special ed funding commission in, about a year and a half, which that is special ed and charter school costs are the two highest cost drivers for districts. And so when we did the special ed funding commission, like coming out of the pandemic, we didn't talk about any of that and we didn't have the court case. So we're going to be having the same conversation in the special ed space of what do we need to do to the special ed funding commission formula and investment in special ed.
I so admire the work that you have done because it's a question of, we've been through past commissions, you can't make the good the enemy of the perfect or the other way around. But fighting for our students, fighting for education, people want to know what's, in my opinion, you want to know what's going on in crime and in other issues in Philadelphia. Look to the quality of the schools and look to school funding and look to the education our children are getting. And we had a past, I can't remember who it was, but it was a past candidate from Central Pennsylvania who taught keyboarding. And she had to teach keyboarding without computers because her district didn't have computers. And my kids went to one of the most well-funded school districts in Pennsylvania, and they got new computer labs every 2 years. How does this make sense? School districts in Philadelphia continue to get the cast-off books from other districts around the state because the school districts, like the one my kids went to, they get rid of their books every 2 years because they're out of date and the books go to Philadelphia. These are things that are changing and affecting our whole Commonwealth. And I'm so grateful that we have people like Donna in her nonprofit status, but that we have elected people like Senator Williams and Rep. Isaacson, who really can talk about what's important in Pennsylvania and the changes. And all we can do, all the rest of us can do, is support the work they're doing, make sure that current electeds, including our governor, know how important this is to all of you, and continue to elect people, in my opinion, strong Democratic women who are going to support this effort and really bring change to Pennsylvania. So I want to thank you both. I think this has been a very, I've learned a lot, and I assume that our 70 guests today have also learned a good deal.
Christine, over the next 4 months, somebody asked, like, how are people going to know, like, what this means for their schools? So between now and June 30th, there's a statewide coalition of which Children First is one of about 12 organizations. And we will be doing events in every media market in about half of the counties with superintendents, with parents and students, talking about what this new resources could mean on the ground. Like how many more teachers, what's it gonna mean for reading support? What's it gonna mean for the kinds of things that really boost student achievement? So, we'll share the information with Represent, and you guys can hear about it in your community. And if you live somewhere that you could host something, but reach out to me, because we will happily organize an event where you are to make sure people know the concrete benefits of what Mary and Lindsey led the charge to get.
Thank you. This has to be an all-in activity for all of us in Pennsylvania if we really want to make change. And I think we've got the opportunity now with that court case, with the strength of this commission. Let's make a difference. Let's make a difference. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
I want to make sure people know we have a couple of our past candidates on the call. Jill Denon, how I wish you were in the Senate with Lindsey now.
Me too. Me too.
Jill had been on her school board, so we really appreciate you being on. I saw Fern Laird on. I saw Janet Diaz on from Lancaster. We have a couple potential endorsees. We have Hadley Haas from Allegheny County, and I think I saw Selena Hodge from Philadelphia, who's is talking about upsetting a current Democrat who's in office, who she doesn't think is strong enough. So we'll be talking to her about her candidacy also. Hi, Selena. But I want to thank all of you for being on today. Let's go to our closing slides, if we could, Tiffany. What have we done so far? We've already invested $20,000 in Patty Kim's race in Harrisburg area to flip a Senate seat. We need more money. We invested $58,000 in December in incumbents, some of whom have are being challenged in their primaries, but also they'll be challenged heavily in the fall. And Mandy Steele from Allegheny County is one who has had, I think it's 14 pieces of literature sent out against her, primarily funded by Jeff Yass, is that his name, Jeff Yass, and the folks who believe in charters. So these are people that we really need to support. There's a special election in Bucks to try and bring it back to 102 to 101, but I've heard about at least 5 women. You know, one of the things that I love about the work that we've done over the last 10 years is both caucuses now know that if they push women candidates for openings and for flippable seats, Represent will be there to support them. So what we've gone from is trying to be the group on the outside who just gives money to try and change an election, to having the powers that be realize what a power we are and what the support of Represent is. How lovely is that? We invested $700,000 last cycle. We need to do more. Last I heard, by the way, there were over 200 bills that the House has passed that the Senate is not listening to. I'm not sure what you're doing over there, Senator Williams, but I know you're not acting on House bills.
We're banning books and putting more guns in schools.
Okay, and that is, yeah. We need volunteers. Send us notes. If you want to figure out how to be on mailing lists and find out about other activities. We will be sending out, as we always do, to everybody who attended this or everybody who had RSVP'd for this, a summary, so you can watch the video again and you can hear what happened today. Did I mention we have 10 years of victories? And the 2 women you heard from today from our legislature are part of that. And there are many more that we want to have there. Is that it? Thank you. I learned a lot, and I'm so appreciative of your time, Senator Williams and Rep. Isaacson. I think these are just the kinds of things we want to make sure everybody knows about. This makes you a better citizen in Pennsylvania, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.